Hey guys, I just want to make a little video talking a little bit about the unit that we're on right now, which is race. This is clearly not a simple topic, and it's one that even after 4 years of teaching, I still struggle with because it's such a huge thing. It has such a big impact on our life. Just to kind of minimize it to a short 3 week unit is feels like it doesn't do justice. But I would like to talk a little bit about the history of race, at least within our country and our society. So, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that when this nation was formed, we had slavery, and our slavery was based on race. So, one of the fundamental roots of this country had to do with racism and the thoughts of white superiority. And those things have kind of trickled down to where we are today. Obviously, it's a lot better than it was then, but every single thing, every single day of our nation's history is impacted by that time and everything involving that. So some of you know, some of you don't, some of you have taken my history class, some of you haven't. In the time of the transatlantic slave trade, there were scientists and doctors who put out misinformation saying that people who are of any race other than white are genetically inferior, that they are built more for working in the fields and hard labor or this and that. And according to their science that they published, their science, that was totally misinformation. So a lot of people believed it because what else did you know besides what you were being told? And it took, it's taken, we're 144 years old, and it's taken that long, 143 years, and we still haven't really fixed this problem of race or racism. What I think is kind of interesting is you as a class all said that you think that racism is still a problem here in the United States. And what is really hopeful for me and what I'm finding is 4 years ago, I had many students tell me that race wasn't a problem, just like the gender unit. I had many students really struggle with these concepts and say it didn't exist, it wasn't real, and they don't know what I'm talking about. But you guys seem pretty like apt at things, and I don't really know if that's because of like media and being online, or maybe you guys are just smarter. I don't really know. So we need to know that the history of race in the United States is based in racist ideas that were published and taken as fact, even though they were completely untrue. So from there, once we ended slavery, we abolished slavery, it it wasn't until the 1960s that we stopped segregation and things like that. So what we have today are now the impacts of all of that. So this week we are going to focus a little bit on answering a lot of your questions as far as what is race, what is ethnicity, what does that mean? I identify as Latino or Hispanic, and that's not on a census form for my race. What does that mean? So we're going to talk about those things this week. We're also going to dig in a little bit deeper to the idea of race as a social construct, which sounds really weird and goofy. But, who started throwing labels on things and when did that happen? Or when did this whole race become an identifying issue for people and a way to group people? And it really hasn't been that way for most of history. So I guess maybe we can go down the history lesson again. Up until the transatlantic slave trade in the late 1600s, early 1700s, people were almost never, they were not enslaved because of their race. They were enslaved because they had been poor or committed a crime or been from a bad family or whatever. But it wasn't until the transatlantic slave trade and kind of these American created philosophies about race that race was really a defining factor in dividing people and putting one group over another. Historically, it was based on so many other things, but never race. There was no reason for that. So that is a relatively new idea, if we're looking at the grand scale of time. But my big question to you guys is, and I struggle with this one, even myself, every year. Is race real? Is that a real idea? Or is that something that, again, as a society, we've just kind of made up to make things work and fit in our boxes? But the question is, if I were to have one white parent and one black parent, you might never know, because I could look as pale as this and you would never know. So am I white or am I black? And am I only white because my skin is lighter, even though I'm 50% genetically black? Or at what point, when you see an Asian person, at what point are they Asian versus Middle Eastern? Or what point are they Chinese versus Korean versus Japanese? And so technically, race comes down to the tone of our skin, the shape of our eyes, and the coarseness and the shape, like texture of our hair. Those are the three things truly that they boil race down to. I just think it's really hard to define or pinpoint a race when you really don't know. 3 years ago in my sociology class, I had the very similar situation. I had a girl looked quite like me, really light skin, really light hair, and she had one white parent and one black parent, and she said she identified as half black, and I had another student in the class who just couldn't cope with that. But how does that work? And I think it is that we all self-identify. It's like, what do you identify as? So let's get to that question on the census now. Every 10 years since the United States has started, we have counted our citizens. And so we're at the 10-year, 2020 here, and we're going to count our citizens again. So that's called the census. And on the census, you have to check your race. However, almost always the options are black, white, Native American, Asian, Pacific Islander. Those are your choices. So what do you do if you identify as Hispanic or Latino and you don't really feel like you are necessarily white, and you're not necessarily black, and you're definitely probably not Asian or Islander? And so that comes down to ethnicity, I guess. And so ethnicity is culture as well as kind of the race element, but it really has more to do with culture. So the theory behind them not putting a Hispanic check mark on the census is that they say that Hispanic means coming from a Spanish-speaking country. So the theory is that you can be white and be Hispanic, you can be black and be Hispanic, you can be Asian and be Hispanic. And so really what they're going off there is just the tone of your skin and how you self-identify. You're either black or you're not. And that's about as far as that goes. And I think maybe I'll post that question for you guys. Do you think that's right or wrong? Or do you think we need to add a Hispanic box on that? Because are people being underrepresented or overrepresented? I'm not sure. But I think I had one more question that I'd really like to address. I have to pull it back up here. It was from Bella. Yes. Okay. The question was, can race and ethnicity also be a religion? So maybe you were thinking about Jewish. That's the one I always come back to. And in that case, yes. I guess I don't really have a lot of other examples, but you can be Jewish through religion, like you can commit to Judaism, or you can be a Jew racially. You can be Jewish racially. During the Holocaust, it was racially. So for that, they had to, their last name helped identify where their heritage came from. And then they literally had to provide proof of their family heritage and kind of where they came from, and if they came from Israel or any Jewish connected background or communities, they were considered Jewish. Today, if you want to become a Jewish person, someone who practices Judaism, it's quite a process you have to go through. Usually you adopt a new name and a lot of other practices. So there is a lot of overlap there, and that's what makes this so difficult. So this week I'm going to have you guys reading a couple articles. We're going to have some discussions. We're going to watch some videos. But I just really haven't made a video for you guys in a while, and I thought it would be really good just to talk a little bit about race and some of the things that make it so complicated and yet so simple as well. We have found that we are all genetically more alike to one another. Me to someone who would identify as black, we're more similar than any two mosquitoes are in their own DNA, and they seem so simple, right? but they are more diverse in their genetics than any of us across any race. So, kind of cool, kind of crazy. Thanks for listening.